Welcome to this training on CISA Domain 1, the process of auditing information systems. This domain carries about 21% weightage in the exam. That's nearly one-fifth of your test questions. So it's not something you can skim over. But more than exam weightage, Domain 1 is the foundation. If you were hired tomorrow as an IT auditor, this is the process you would actually follow on the job. So, in the next 30 minutes, I'll walk you through the role of IT audits, the standards and frameworks behind them, the audit lifecycle, planning, execution, reporting, follow-up, and some exam tips and real-world examples that will help you connect theory to practice. So let's start with why IT auditing matters. So organizations rely heavily on IT. Think about it. Banks, airlines, hospitals, governments, all powered by technology. When IT system fails, the consequences are enormous. So yeah, let me give you a story. A few years ago, a hospital in the UK had to cancel surgeries because of ransomware attack. Doctor couldn't access patients' records. That wasn't just a tech problem, it was a life and death problem. This is why auditing IT system matters. IT audit provide assurance that systems are secure, data is accurate, controls align with business goals and regulations. In real life, an auditor is like a trust builder, ensuring management, regulators, and customers can trust the system in place. Now, how do we perform audits consistently? By following standards. First is ISACA IT audit standards, the guide independence, ethics, planning, execution, and reporting. They make audit credible. Second is COBIT, control objectives for information and related technology. Framework linking IT processes to business goals. Very exam relevant. Expect scenario questions here. Okay. Then third one is the very common framework. If you are already into the cybersecurity domain, you would had heard of it somewhere, or maybe you would already have some experience on implementing or auditing the standards, which is ISO IEC 27001. It is a global standard for information security management system. Think policies, risk treatment, continuous improvement. Then the fourth one is NIST cybersecurity framework. It includes identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. These are actually the 5 stages in NIST cybersecurity framework, which is very common in US organizations. And an exam tip. So, whenever you guys are in doubt about the answer, just remember this, that the answer that aligns with standards, independence, and business risk is usually correct. So, love to share a real world example. So, let's consider someone is auditing a financial institution, or let's say like auditing a financial institution isn't just about checking password policies. You also check if IT processes are aligned with the framework like PCI DSS or GDPR. The CISA exam expects you to think at that level. Now, moving on to the audit planning part. What is planning? So basically, planning is the blueprint of an audit. Yeah. Mm, Now let's not consider about an audit. In general, what planning is. Planning is actually a blueprint of any task which we are intended to do, or which we will do in after certain time, or after some interval. So similarly, eh, in audit, we need to plan the audit before even starting with the execution. Okay, so there are like different steps in planning. We'll start with defining scope and objectives. Okay, so what do we mean by the scope? So scope actually gives us an idea on which area do we need to cover during an audit. Okay, so let's say scope defines, are we just going to audit the entire ERP system, or are we going to just audit the user access? Okay, so now let's say there's an application which needs to be audited. Now, without scope, we won't be able to understand what is the area of focus. There's an application, they have just said, or let's say an organization is there with lot of different departments, and we want to audit. So we need to understand, do we need to consider all the departments for audit, or is there any, like particular departments which needs to be audited? So that's what scoping actually means. In very simple terms, it can be termed as a boundary of the audit. Okay. Then second would be performing the risk assessment. Okay. So when we say performing a risk assessment, what we actually do, is that we try to identify the area of highest risk. Now, let's say that I am trying to get into the office premises which have one main gate, then a cafeteria, and then the other gate, which by which we can enter to the actual workplace where the systems have been kept or where the actual files are being located. So among those two gates, which gate would be the area of the high risk? Now let's say an attacker went into has an intention to steal the data from an organization. It started entered he entered the first gate where only the cafeteria is there. There's nothing much than a coffee machine where someone can sit and drink a coffee. And the other gate, if he bypasses that gate, there are PCs or there are, let's say, certain CD DVDs or certain physical copies which have been kept, which are actually very confidential. So when we compare the first and the second gate, definitely the second gate will be the area of higher risk. So we need to make sure that the high risk area is equipped with all the controls to perform any kind of an exploit to happen. Okay, so that is what the main agenda of performing a risk assessment. For example, as we discussed, so the that example would comes into the weak access management. If it is there, it needs to be fixed. Now comes to the third part, which is developing an audit program. So when we say we need to develop an audit program, what does it comes to the mind? So developing an audit program means listing out the detailed procedures on how the audit will be conducted and how the effectiveness will get tested. For example, let's say we want to audit a change management. So how are we going to review the change management and how are we going to test the effective change management? Another example, we are trying to check a user provisioning. So what is the procedure? How we will start auditing the whole user provisioning process and how we'll test whether the recommended process is being followed or not. So that is what audit program says. Developing an audit program actually means. Now comes the fourth part where we'll start allocating the resources, which means that assigning an auditor or deciding on the timelines or taking an account for a tool. We need to implement certain tool to initiate the audit. The tool will be automatically capturing or gathering all the evidences like that. So again, an exam tip for you guys. Planning must always be risk based. Don't just spend, like equal efforts everywhere. The main focus area would be the area with the highest risk. Sharing and story. So, in one audit, a team spent weeks checking password complexity, but they missed the fact that database backups weren't encrypted. Later, what happened? The company suffered a breach Attackers stole backup tips. What do we learn about after understanding? What's the lesson we had learned? Is the focus should always be on the high impact areas. Now, teams spend all the time checking the password complexity, but instead, the higher risk was there that the database backup was not encrypted. So, an auditor should always starts with focusing on the high impact areas or high impact risks. Moving on to the next slide. Hmm. Audit execution. Okay, so this is actually where we do the audit. Mm, so these are the listed key activities. We'll start with collecting evidences. When we say collecting evidences, it can include logs, system configurations, screenshots, interviews with the stakeholders or employers, employees, and direct observation of what is going in day-to-day activities of people. Then other key activity will one of other key activity will be testing the controls. What we'll try to do. So let's say try we'll start brainstorming and trying different ideas to understand whether the controls are effective or not. So controls in a place means that there are certain procedure or process to be followed which are backed by each controls. So if that process is not being followed, it means that we can't move to the next step. So we'll try testing a control with random brainstorming. So just for an example, let's say I'll try creating a user without approval. I'll try to note down the findings as well. Does the system allow it? How like user created, or just after I tried to create a user, the system shows any notification that you need this user's creation needs to be approved from someone else, because a person, when we talk about the control, when we talk about user creation, it should always go with approval. Without approval, if someone is able to create a user, it means that there's a gap in certain controls. And we don't test everything. That's where next step comes in, which is sampling. We will try to take a sample out of all the evidences that will represent this scenario of the control. Okay, because the organizations are huge, we can't test each and every control for each and every department, because these are literally huge and it's kind of a very time consuming, which in spite will also uh, trigger the cost, the timeline, the operations. So just to make sure that the things are being followed, we take a random record from the all the records. That is what we say as a sampling. And moving to the next one, after sampling, we start documenting the findings. We start document the findings, because in audit, if something is not being documented, it means that it didn't even happen. So you need to document each and every observations, each and every procedure, whatever you had completed, what evidence you had taken, what was your observation, what control you had tested, what kind of uh, uh, what are your observations on the controls, and so on and so forth. Now, there are like what would be the quality of a good evidence? So, evidence must follow SRRU: sufficient, reliable, relevant, useful. So, when we say sufficient, it means that the evidence should be enough to support the conclusion. Reliable, it means that the evidence had come from a trusted source. Should be relevant, which means that the evidence should match the objective of the control or objective of the finding. Then comes the useful, which helps in making decisions. So again, one more exam trick for you guys. If two answer mentions evidence, pick the one that emphasizes independent and reliable sources. Now let's move on to the fifth section, audit reporting. The end product of an audit is the report. Okay, a strong audit report should be clear and concise, focus on risks and impacts, and it should provide the practical recommendation or the actionable recommendation. Let's say, for example, instead of just saying servers not patched, a strong report says unpatched servers increases the likelihood of ransomware, which may disrupt business operations. So the recommendation would be to implement automated patch management within 30 days. Okay. Exam tip for you guys. Always tie findings to business risk. CISA is not purely technical details. It's about how IT risks affect the business. Because why we are getting the system audited. So at the end, IT is a enabler which enables the business operations so that the operations can run and business objective can be fulfilled. So always keep that in mind. Audit CISA is not only focused about auditing IT or just keep your mind open. It can be applied to your day-to-day activities as well. What is risk? Let's say you are walking from your home to your office. There are certain risks. How you will control that risk? What would be the procedures you will follow? If there are some recommendations which you think that okay, I should follow certain recommendations to make sure that I'm not inviting any sort of an accident. So just keep your mind in a very risk perspective open. Again, I'm telling, CISA is not about pure technical details. It's about how IT risk affects the business, how uh, IT risk can affect the operation, which again will affect the business. So the main goal of all of this audit IT is to meet the business objectives. So Moving on to the next one. So, audit follow-up. This is again a very crucial part of an audit because following up makes sure that the recommendations have been implemented, and it will also ensures an auditor that the risk is now reduced, or what, or let's say it will also ensures an auditor to watch for emerging or the new risk. Okay, so follow-up proves whether the audit have added value to the organization. Let's let's say for an example, if you recommend multi-factor authentication, you should verify on a later stage that MFA was implemented and working. So if the recommendation have been added, it will enable an auditor to identify what are the new risks which have been emerged, or moreover, what are the improvement we can make to the process so that the risks are getting mitigated, or getting reduced. The overall organizational risk or risk appetite, we can say, is getting reduced. Okay, so moving on. So I think we are quite done. So some exam tips and some key takeaways before we wrap up. So audit life cycle starts from plan to execute to report to follow up. Always link findings to business objectives. The primary focus of the audit should be on the high risk areas. Evidence must be in a SSSRRU, sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful. Audit must be independent, and objectivity are critical in audit. So auditor independence is actually essential so that no one have a control over the audit or over the findings. No influences must be there, and that's the reason why in an organization the internal audit team is totally separate, so that it can uh, like the judgment can be made on a very neutral grounds and not attached with some, or not being manipulated from certain departments. Then report must connect technical findings to the business risk. If torn between two answers, always try to pick business risk focused findings. Then these are some of the key takeaways. So IT audit always try to protect organizations, customers, and reputation. Again, the IT audit meet should enable the business objectives. It's not a separate function. The main intention of auditing an IT is to reduce risk so that a business can achieve their objectives more smoothly. Then some of the frameworks which we generally follow as a part of a audit. These are ISACA, COBIT, ISO 27001, and NIST and NIST. Then planning is a kind of a blueprint of an audit, from where actually the audit starts, and execution is more of evidence gathering and control testing. Then comes the reporting. It should be aligned with the business objectives as well. And follow-up shows the real impact, whether the risk identified have been mitigated and what are the new or emerging risks. Yeah, so these are the foundation for CISA exam, and we completed our domain 1. Next would be the domain 2, which will be having a more focus on governance and the management of IT. Yeah, okay. Thank you.